The afternoon of May 4th, 1945, was not marked by the sound of gunfire, but by the relentless drumming of rain against the bunkers of Lüneburg Heath. Inside a reinforced concrete tomb 12 meters below the mud, Major Klaus Hartman stared at a wireless radio. Outside, the world was ending. British armor had encircled his position like a ring of steel teeth. Inside, 400 men, most of them barely old enough to shave, clung to their rifles, waiting for a word that would either save them or bury them. The British demand was simple: surrender. Hartman's response was a single, cold syllable: a refusal. It was a choice born of 12 years of iron discipline and a deep, gnawing fear of what lay beyond those bunker doors. But what followed wasn't an artillery barrage. It wasn't an assault. Instead, a voice crackled through the static. Not a nameless lieutenant, but Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery himself. The exchange that followed would fundamentally rewrite everything Hartman believed about power, mercy, and the weight of a soldier's soul. Before we dive into this extraordinary standoff, make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments. If you were in Hartman's boots, facing a lost war, what would it take for you to finally lay down your arms? To understand why Hartman said no, you have to look past the uniform. He had been molded by the Reich since 1933. At 19, the army wasn't just his career, it was his religion. For a decade, he had been fed a steady diet of horror stories, that the Allies were butchers, that surrender meant a ditch and a bullet, or a slow death in a cage. In the bunker, this wasn't just propaganda, it was his reality. He knew what Germany had done. He knew the scorched earth they had left behind in the East. He expected reciprocity because he couldn't imagine a world where justice wasn't just a different name for revenge. He looked at his men, conscripts, boys, the final scrapings of a dying empire, and he saw his duty as protecting them from a mercy he believed was a lie. Then came the radio call. Montgomery's voice wasn't filled with the heat of battle. It was precise, factual. He didn't offer threats. He offered a status report. Major, you are out of food. You have wounded. The war is over. Your courage is noted, but courage without a goal is merely waste. Hartman waited for the ultimatum. He checked his watch, a precision German timepiece, a gift from his father. It ticked toward a destruction that never arrived. Instead of shells, Montgomery sent a single man, a middle-aged British medic carrying a white flag and a medical bag. The medic didn't storm the bunker. He knocked. He spent 3 hours in the dark, damp lower levels, cleaning wounds and administering morphine to German boys. He left behind supplies and a silent message. We are not who you were told we are. When night fell, the psychological pressure intensified. It wasn't the sound of engines that broke the men's resolve, but the scent of frying bacon and fresh bread drifting through the vents. The British were cooking dinner just beyond the perimeter. It was a tactical demonstration of abundance versus scarcity. By the second day, the letters arrived. A handwritten note from Montgomery himself. It didn't demand an oath. It asked a question. Are you defending a country, or are you choosing death for 400 men who have a future? Why did Montgomery play this game? It wasn't just kindness. It was a masterclass in military policy built on 4 pillars. First, security. Cruelty breeds resistance. Decency breeds compliance. Second, intelligence. A living prisoner who feels respected is a fountain of information. A brutalized one is a wall of silence. Third, reciprocity. Britain still had men in German hands. Every act of mercy here was an insurance policy for their own. Fourth, morality. To win the war but lose the civilization you are fighting for is a hollow victory. The final straw wasn't a tactical failure. It was a burst appendix. A 17-year-old private collapsed. Without surgery, he was a dead man. Hartman, the man who had refused to speak to the enemy, finally keyed the mic. "I have a medical emergency." The response was instant. "Send him out. You have my word." Hours later, a note returned. The surgery was a success. The boy was alive. In that moment, the 12-year wall of propaganda in Hartman's mind finally crumbled. At 3 a.m. on the third day, Hartman gathered his officers. He looked at their tired young faces, lives that should have been spent in universities or starting families. He told them the truth. The war was a ghost, and their duty was now to the living. At 9 a.m., the bunker doors creaked open. Hartman walked out first. He looked at his watch one last time, 9:47 a.m., and he stopped winding it. He let the mechanism die. It was the moment time stopped being a measure of survival and started being a measure of life. The aftermath wasn't the horror Hartman feared. It was tea in tin mugs, agricultural work in Yorkshire, and slowly, the realization of what his country had truly done. He spent 2 years in a camp, learning that real strength isn't the ability to destroy, but the discipline to restrain. Fast forward to 1963. An elderly Hartman, now a history teacher, meets an aged Montgomery at a conference in London. They don't speak as enemies, but as two men who passed a test. Montgomery tells him, "The measure of an army is how it treats the defeated." Hartman tells him, "I learned more about courage in 3 days of your silence than in 12 years of my service." Today, that watch sits in a museum in Hamburg. It remains unwound, stuck at 9:47 a.m. It serves as a reminder that there are moments when we must stop, question the path we were trained to follow, and choose a different direction. Montgomery and Hartman were on opposite sides of the greatest conflict in history, but they both understood a truth that echoes today. Real power is what you do when you have all the cards and choose to show mercy. If this story changed how you think about strength, hit that like button. We'll be back next week with another forgotten chapter of the human cost of war. Until then, remember, the hardest choice isn't always to fight. Sometimes it's knowing when to stop.